Exclusive to Xbox One and PC, State of Decay 2 blends 4-player online co-op with a well-worn zombie apocalypse setting, and the idea on the surface is sound. In a similar vein to PUBG, survival is the name of the game. You explore a seamless open area for weapons and items, claim safe houses, and scout new spots for your community of survivors to migrate to. It expands on the original's concept then, but the technology behind it gets a full reset. Built on Unreal Engine 4 this time, State of Decay 2 abandons the CryEngine 3.1 of the original game, explaining that 5-year interim. It's a fundamental overhaul in rendering technology, but with that transition comes a fair share of teething troubles, notably on the Xbox One and X versions I'm focusing on today. The positives first. Looking at Xbox One X, this is a fully open field game with dynamic time of day, physics simulation on objects, and some beautiful lighting effects. Pop-in is surprisingly well hidden overall, and past a lengthy initial load, everything that follows is seamless. It's not a showcase for the system by any means, a shame given it is an exclusive, but there are some eye-catching moments in there. Unfortunately, while the X rendition has these visual niceties, my first experience of it was sadly on the base Xbox One console, where State of Decay 2 looks dated for a current gen game. There's a lot here that doesn't hold up on a regular Xbox One, whether it's the pop-in on that console, the soup-like texture quality, the heavy dithered motion blur, or the low-grade lens flare effects. Every facet of its visual design feels compromised in some way. The last bit sticks out like a sore thumb. Panning the camera around, the lens flare's trajectory across the screen updates at slow intervals, out of sync with the game's frame rate. Now, if we flip to Xbox One X, it's problem solved there and we get a smooth, clean rotation from that lens flare effect. It's a shame that such a simple effect gets dialed back, and you need to upgrade to the enhanced console here to solve it. In fact, Xbox One X gets one of the most obvious upgrades over the base machine I've seen to date, but that's mostly due to the hard limits on a regular Xbox One. Jumping to X, almost everything is enhanced, though with one big drawback I'll cover later. In the developer's own words, executive producer Jeff Strain states we get higher resolution textures owing to X's increase in RAM and CPU power. On top of that, there's mention of denser foliage, higher poly character models, upgraded shadows, and depth of light from farther draw distances. But again, it does feel like Xbox One X is the starting point in visual design, from which aggressive chops and changes were made later on to suit the weaker machine. Textures are a clear case in point of where the two stand side by side. Materials get a higher resolution asset on the enhanced console, from the rusted metal on vehicles to the cracked roadwork. In all honesty, the result on Xbox One X is what I'd hoped we'd see on the regular machine. They're not extravagant, just adequate for viewing at a distance. Xbox One meanwhile pushes some woefully low-grade textures, and clearly that extra 4GB of RAM opens the gates to a much needed higher setting. Even more crucially, texture filtering across the game gets a visible uptick, meaning all those surfaces stay sharp even at a distance. Draw distances get a matching upgrade too, mostly on grass and shadow detailing past a preset cascade. Running at pace through the city outskirts, you get a sense something is missing on a base Xbox One playing it the first time. Fields appear barren at range, and only by jumping to X did I appreciate how much more fleshed out they should be. More subtle is the change in shadows. The draw distance there is noticeably pushed out, though admittedly there is still a visible fade-in transition on X hardware, paired with an increase in shadow resolution up close, and it's a satisfying leap between the two. The texture, shadow, and draw distance tweaks make a big aggregate difference for X, especially bearing in mind the resolutions on each console. A base Xbox One, for example, runs at a dynamic 1600 by 900 resolution. That's 900p, but with the lowest figure I've consistently seen coming in at 1536 by 864. All of its shortcomings stick out even at that value, and so it's imperative Xbox One X upped its game in overall settings to match that higher resolution. That being a push to a dynamic 3840 by 2160, though again with shifts below that number. The approach here is a little different to the base machine and tends to only shift on the horizontal axis, the lowest value I've seen being 3072 by 2160 or 80% of a true 4K. One sour note here is, even with all those extra pixels being pushed, The fact is, the final image is still smudged over with one of the most aggressive forms of motion blur I've seen. Nudge that right thumbstick in any direction and all that extra fine detail vanishes on either console. The plus side, at least, is Xbox One X decreases the dithering artifacts seen on the base Xbox One's motion blur. Quality is ramped up a preset, and taking a snapshot of each, the enhanced machine does come off better. It's more refined and easier on the eye. Alright, before we kick off with the performance analysis, Xbox One X does deserve some credit for tackling another issue. Another plus in the post-processing category is Ambient Occlusion, a thicker implementation on X. In general, global shadows are a significant leap up. The standard Xbox One uses a culling feature, reducing shadow detail to triangles when they pass behind objects, presumably to save on GPU resource. It's nowhere near as obvious on the more powerful kit, and along with its improved motion blur, it's one less distraction when playing on an Ultra HD TV. The other foot lands hard though, and none of these extras come for free. Let's cut straight to it. Side by side, Xbox One and X have one thing in common at least, as each is fully unlocked to run from 0 to 60 FPS with no 30 FPS cap. Now obviously, this makes no sense in the context of the game never reaching that top number. Outside of staring at the sky, you're never hitting 60 FPS on either console, and so capping the game would have made much more sense. Especially looking at the Xbox One X's performance, which mostly sticks around that 30 FPS number anyway. All this does at least put one point into clear view. Xbox One X performs worse than a standard Xbox One model, sometimes even slipping from 30 FPS into the high 20s. By comparison, a regular Xbox model capably runs the gamut between 30 to 45 FPS, and really it all comes down to the cost of X's higher settings and the res boost to a dynamic 4K. The bottom line, there is no graphics or performance mode toggle in this game on either machine, and so you're stuck with what Undead Labs is serving, and for X owners that's categorically a much lower frame rate overall. Neither is ideal of course. Looking at a standard Xbox One in isolation, there's no absolute get out from its severe performance drops. Driving around brings out the worst of it, slipping from 30 FPS to the low 20s in the central town areas. Unfortunately, that means a cap wouldn't help the cause here, and equally the base Xbox One stutters a surprising amount. Expect hitches in gameplay lasting over 120 milliseconds, likely owing to a much lower clock Jaguar CPU attempting to quickly stream in new textures. From what I've tested, Xbox One X suffers from the same issue, but the stutters are minimized hugely. All this doesn't make up for the lower average frame rates across the board on X. Clearly, the best starting point would be to introduce that 30 FPS cap, leaving each frame with a more realistic 33.3 millisecond render time. It'd do wonders for a bulk of the experience on the base machine, and to a large extent the X model too, smoothing it out with an even cadence of frames. Even then, taking into account sub 30 FPS drops, we're talking worse performance from a more expensive machine. Those visual extras give the game an incredible makeover, but as an online game, it's unfair on Xbox One X owners to also get such a heavy performance penalty. Exploring, aiming and driving are all made harder thanks to these drops, and something has to change. One simple fix could be to offer a performance mode, where something in the spirit of Rise of the Tomb Raider would work here. I'd be fascinated to see what X hardware could do, for example, just running at the base Xbox One resolution and settings, and whether it could get close to 60 FPS that way. Equally, a mode tailored for a flawless 30 FPS must be doable starting from those settings and working upwards. State of Decay 2's condition at launch is in serious need of attention then. With HDR enabled on Xbox One X, it can look pleasant, but that low performance often overshadows any eye candy it has to offer. Glitches also detract from the sense this is a fully polished release. I've so far caught big problems in character pathfinding during combat, and even corrupt loading screen textures. With an extra pass, this could be an entertaining co-op experience, and cross-playable with a PC release no less. But for now, the technical points get in the way on console, whether that's on a base Xbox One or better. Anyway, I'd be intrigued to hear of your experiences with State of Decay 2 so far. Meanwhile, if you haven't tried it yet and found this video insightful, do let us know with a like or even hitting the subscribe button. From there, you can set notifications whenever a new video lands. As a 4K video as well, this is available on our Patreon at source file quality at digitalfoundry.net. Any questions, do get in touch with me or the team on Twitter. But until next time, thanks for watching.